Hi everyone, my name is Kathryn Carroll, and today we are going to be talking about my research program, Black and White. Terms to know before we get into the research project: moral language. Terms are used by religious and political leaders to create stigma around an event. This could be positive or negative stigma, so things saying like right or wrong, sinful or holy, things of that nature. Latent content analysis is going to be analyzing different articles or other sources of media for understood meanings of phrases and words. So things that aren't written out, but are understood by locals in their meaning. Manifest content analysis is going to be the opposite of latent content analysis. It is analyzing different media sources for blatantly written terms and wordings. That's going to be the majority of moral language in this case. Intersectionality is how the different facets of your identity interact with one another in social settings. So like being a Black woman or a white man or a Republican Jewish person. Those are different facets of your identity, but they will affect you differently in certain social settings. So to get right into it, after the murder of George Floyd in May of 2020, the nation really blew up with protests and riots because of the anger and grief of the Black community, and rightfully so. Police brutality started being studied, and in these last few months, the local and national leaders have really spoken up in support or admonishment of these protests. And like in all states, Alabama saw these peaceful protests as well as violent ones. In the four largest cities, Birmingham, Montgomery, Mobile, and Huntsville, the mayors and chiefs of police were watched and recorded in responding to the needs and feelings of their citizens. I will be using mostly AL.com for my sources, but there are, of course, lots more. In this paper, we will be talking about the moral language and responses of these city leaders through latent and manifest content analysis. So a little bit of demographic information. At the top, these are the pictures of the men that we will be studying. From left to right, we start with Huntsville with Tommy Battle, the mayor, and the chief of police, Mark McMurray. In Mobile, we have Sandy Stimpson and Lawrence Batista from Mobile. In Birmingham, we have Randall Woodfin and Patrick Smith. And from Montgomery, we have Stephen Reed and Ernest Finley. So on the count of race, white is 37.5% of the count, and Black is 62.5%. With the count of political affiliation, this only counts mayors. I was unable to find the parties of the chief of police. So it's actually 50-50 between Republican and Democrat. So let's talk about finding. There was no correlation between political party and the reactions that the leaders had to protests and riots. All involved parties, however, openly admonished violent acts by citizens. And by admonishment, I mean anywhere from saying on the news that they were very disappointed in their citizens to shooting rubber bullets and tear gassing them. But they also showed support for grieving of the protesters over George Floyd and the other murders that came to follow. This support was seen in different levels. You did have some police chiefs going out into the crowds, and then you did have some mayors like Tommy Battle who were kneeling with the protesters at the beginning of the protests. Violent acts did bring the removal of Confederate statues in Birmingham as well as in Mobile. This is correlating with conflict theory, saying that you have to stand and fight to get anything done. An uprising, in this case, would have been considered necessary by W.E.B. Du Bois and Karl Marx. And the police chiefs responded differently depending on race. This was a huge finding. The only white police chief in the sample, Mark McMurray, was the only one who said things like the protesters got what they deserved, that he would use tear gas again, that he felt that they were in the right and that they didn't have to look at the police system in Huntsville to fix it. All the other police chiefs actually stood in the crowds with the protesters holding signs. They would say things, specifically Patrick Smith tweeted "4, not 1." And protest of only one police officer involved in the George Floyd murder being prosecuted. So there were very different reactions based on race. Why is this even important? Well, we can see how our leaders in Alabama react to protests and cries for help from their citizens. We saw that some leaders decided to actually help within the protests, and then some leaders decided to act in violence towards peaceful protesters. We can also see the effects of race and conflict theory. You can see this in W.E.B. Du Bois's books, and how he talks about Black poor people and white poor people do have different battles that they have to face. We can see the effects that demographics have on the way people react in certain situations. As we saw, political affiliation was not a demographic that affected their reactions, however, race was. And following up on that, we can see how power and race intersectionality affects leaders' reactions to citizens breaking social norms. So social norms being, going to the mayor's office instead of breaking down a statue when you're not happy with something. Michelle Alexander brings up in her book, The New Jim Crow, that even though we have had a Black president and several members of the Senate and the House of Representatives being African American, we still have a problem with power protecting the status quo in social settings. So that causes a lot of problems for lower income Black families, because let's be honest, high-class senators are not going to be living in the same situations as lower-class people. So if you want to learn more about any of these topics, I would suggest reading one of these 3 books. They are all available on Amazon. Racism Without Racist by Eduardo Bonasilva is a very interesting read on colorblind racism and pretty much the new face of racism. While we can no longer be blatantly racist, we can say things about those people. Policing Black Bodies is about the over-policing of majority Black communities and impoverished communities, and how it is contributing to mass incarceration. And then The New Jim Crow was kind of a mix of these 2 books. It is by Michelle Alexander. I brought it up a little earlier, and it is about mass incarceration in the age of colorblindness. Here are my sources. Most of them, like I said earlier, are from al.com. And you are more than welcome to look into any of these. And my pictures came from these websites. I have them labeled as to which city gave me what. And that's all. I really appreciate you for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.